The crack of the auctioneer's gavel sliced through the dusty air of Gold Hill, Nevada, like a gunshot, freezing Violet Jameson's blood as she clutched her twin infants closer to her trembling body. It was 1875, and she had never imagined her life would come to this, standing exposed on an auction block. Her tear-stained face bowed in shame while her babies suckled at her breasts beneath a tattered shawl. The summer heat was merciless that day, bearing down on the crowd gathered in the makeshift auction yard behind the trading post. Violet's throat was parched, but she dared not ask for water. She had learned quickly that slaves, even temporary contract slaves like herself, were expected to endure, not request. The debt her late husband had accrued before dying of typhoid fever 3 months prior had condemned her to this fate. With no family and nowhere to turn, the bank had seized everything, including her own freedom and that of her 6-week-old twins, a boy and girl born just after their father's death. Next up, gentlemen. A healthy young woman, 22 years of age, with nursing twins. The auctioneer's booming voice carried across the yard. Good for housekeeping, cooking, and comes with 2 infants that'll grow into fine laborers. 3-year labor contract to pay off her husband's debts, starting bid at $80. The crowd murmured, some men eyeing her with interest, others with disdain. Women were rarely auctioned in this fashion, but the West had its own brand of cruelty disguised as justice. Labor contracts were legal, though the practice was uncommon and unsavory to many. I ain't paying for no babies. Someone shouted. Split 'em up, called another voice. Sell the woman separate. Violet's heart raced in terror. She couldn't lose her children, they were all she had left. Please, she whispered, though no one paid her any mind. Please don't take my babies. The auctioneer hesitated, looking to the bank representative, who shrugged indifferently. Very well, we can sell them separately if need be. Just as Violet felt her world crumbling beneath her, a deep voice cut through the rabble. $100 for all 3. The crowd parted to reveal a tall man in a dust-covered duster coat, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood straight-backed, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. Well now, we have a sensible bidder, the auctioneer said with renewed enthusiasm. $100 for the woman and her twins. Do I hear 120? Silence fell over the crowd. The stranger's presence seemed to command a certain respect, or perhaps fear. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer paused dramatically, scanning the crowd for competition. 150, said the stranger suddenly, bidding against himself. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. 150 from the gentleman in the back. Any other bids? When none came, the gavel struck again. Sold. To Mr. Everett Chase, the man supplied, stepping forward to complete the transaction. Violet clutched her babies tighter, uncertain whether to feel relief or terror. Had she and her children just been saved or condemned to something worse? Everett approached the auction block, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Up close, Violet could see his face clearly, for the first time weathered by sun and wind, but not unkind. Deep blue eyes studied her beneath furrowed brows, and a day's growth of beard shadowed his strong jawline. He wasn't young, perhaps mid-30s, but he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard living. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Violet nodded, adjusting her shawl to better cover her exposed breasts and the baby still nursing there. "My wagon's just down the street," he said, offering her his hand to help her down from the platform. Hesitantly, she took it, conscious of her disheveled appearance and the stares of the townsfolk. She hadn't been allowed to bathe properly in days, and her once pretty calico dress was soiled and rumpled. The twins squirmed against her, sensing her anxiety. Everett led her through the crowd, which parted without comment. A few people nodded to him respectfully, while others averted their eyes. Violet wondered what kind of man commanded such deference. His wagon was waiting as promised, a sturdy farm wagon with a team of 2 strong bay horses. A young boy sat on the driver's bench, holding the reins. "This is Timothy," Everett said. "He helps me around the ranch." The boy, no more than 14, nodded politely but stared openly at the twins. "You really bought babies, Mr. Chase?" "Mind your manners, Tim," Everett chided gently. "Help the lady into the wagon." Timothy scrambled down to assist Violet, who was struggling to climb up while holding the infants. Once settled in the wagon bed, which had been lined with fresh straw and blankets, Violet finally found her voice. "Where are you taking us, Mr. Chase?" Everett secured her contract papers inside his coat before mounting the wagon. "To my ranch, about 12 miles north of town. It's not much, but it's quiet there." He glanced back at her. "You and your little ones will be safe. What do you expect of me?" Violet asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he placed his bid. Everett's expression remained unreadable. "For now, just to rest. You look like you haven't had a decent meal or sleep in days." As they pulled away from Gold Hill, Violet watched the mining town recede into the distance. She didn't know what awaited her at Everett Chase's ranch, but at least her twins were still in her arms. That was something worth being grateful for, even as uncertainty gnawed at her heart. The journey to Everett's ranch passed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional cry from one of the twins or Timothy's curious questions, which Everett usually answered with a patient but brief response. Violet learned that the ranch was called Silverbrook, named for the small stream that cut through the property, and that Everett had been running it alone since his father's death 5 years earlier. "Not entirely alone," Timothy corrected. "I've been helping since last spring, and there's old Fletcher who tends the horses." "Fletcher's more guest than hired hand these days," Everett said with a hint of fondness, "but he still knows more about horses than most men half his age." The landscape changed as they traveled, the barren hills giving way to more fertile ground as they followed the course of a small river. When they crested a rise, Violet caught her first glimpse of Silverbrook Ranch, a modest but well-kept property nestled in a green valley, with a 2-story wooden house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand, but compared to the squalid room she'd occupied since her husband's death, it looked like paradise. As they approached the house, a gray-haired man emerged from the barn, lifting a hand in greeting. "That's Fletcher," Everett explained. "Been with my family since before I was born." Fletcher hobbled over as Everett brought the wagon to a stop in the yard. His weathered face creased into a puzzled expression when he spotted Violet and the twins. "Didn't know we were expecting company, Everett," he said, eyeing Violet curiously. "Wasn't planned," Everett replied, jumping down from the wagon. "Fletcher, this is Miss Violet Jameson and her children. They'll be staying with us." Fletcher's bushy eyebrows shot up, but he touched the brim of his hat politely. "Madam, welcome to Silverbrook." Timothy helped Violet down from the wagon while Everett gathered a small bundle of her belongings, all she had left in the world, just a change of clothes and a few baby items she'd managed to keep. "Tim, unhitch the team and see to the horses," Everett instructed. "Fletcher, would you ask Martha to prepare a room for Miss Jameson and her little ones?" "Martha?" Violet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My housekeeper," Everett explained. "Well, more of a cook, really. Lives in town but comes out 3 days a week to keep us from living like complete savages." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Lucky for you, today's one of her days." The inside of the house was surprisingly comfortable, clean, and orderly, with solid furniture and a few modest touches that suggested a woman's influence at some point. Martha, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, greeted Violet warmly. "My stars, look at these precious angels," she cooed at the twins. "How old are they?" "6 weeks," Violet answered, relaxing slightly in the presence of another woman. "This is Sarah and this is Samuel. And you've been caring for them all on your own, after losing your husband." Martha clucked sympathetically. "You poor dear. Let's get you settled in the guest room upstairs. You look dead on your feet." Martha led Violet upstairs to a clean, airy room with a large bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. A small trundle bed had been hastily prepared in the corner. "For the babies," Martha explained, "though I expect they'll be sleeping close to their mama for some time yet." She patted Violet's shoulder. "I'll bring up some warm water for you to freshen up and then a proper meal." "When did you last eat, child?" Violet couldn't remember. The bank men had given her scraps, barely enough to keep her milk flowing for the twins. "Yesterday, I think," she murmured. Martha's expression darkened. "Well, that won't do, not at all." She bustled out of the room, muttering under her breath about the cruelty of men. Left alone, Violet sank into the rocking chair, adjusting her dress to nurse the twins again. They were starting to fuss, hungry despite having fed during the wagon ride. As she rocked gently, she gazed out the window at the ranch spread out below. A small garden bordered the house, and beyond it, the land rolled away toward distant mountains. It was beautiful and peaceful, so different from the mining town where she'd lived with her husband. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, quickly covering herself with her shawl. It was Everett, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of soup, fresh bread, and a cup of tea. He hesitated when he saw her nursing, his gaze quickly shifting to the floor. "Martha's busy with dinner," he explained, setting the tray on a small table. "She thought you might need something right away." "Thank you," Violet said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "Mr. Chase, Everett, please." "Everett," she amended. "I don't understand why you bought my contract. Why would you want a woman with 2 infants?" He leaned against the doorframe, considering his words carefully. "I was in town to sell some cattle when I heard about the auction. Didn't sit right with me, selling a mother and her babies." He shrugged as if it were a simple matter. The money wasn't important. Violet studied him, trying to discern if there was more to his story. Most men would have walked on by. "I'm not most men." His gaze met hers briefly. "Your contract says 3 years of service to clear your husband's debts. I don't intend to hold you to that if you've somewhere else to go. But if not, you're welcome here. There's plenty of work running a ranch, and an extra pair of hands would be useful." Before Violet could respond, Sarah began to wail in earnest, followed quickly by Samuel. Everett straightened, clearly uncomfortable with the crying. "I'll let you tend to them. Martha will be up with the bathwater soon." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Miss Jameson, you and your children are safe here. You have my word on that." As he closed the door behind him, Violet felt tears spring to her eyes, the first tears of relief she'd shed in months. True to his word, Everett made no demands of Violet during her first week at Silverbrook Ranch. Martha came daily rather than her usual 3 times a week, fussing over Violet and the twins, ensuring they were well fed and comfortable. Violet gradually regained her strength, the regular meals and peaceful environment working wonders after her ordeal. By the 8th day, she felt restless, confined to the house while everyone else worked. That morning after breakfast, while Martha was cleaning the kitchen, Violet approached Everett as he reviewed ledgers at the dining table. "Mr. Chase, Everett, I'd like to earn my keep," she said firmly. "I can cook, clean, mend clothing, even garden. I'm not afraid of work." Everett looked up, studying her with those piercing blue eyes. "The twins keep you busy enough. They're good babies and they sleep more now that we're settled. Besides, I can work with them nearby." She straightened her shoulders. "I may be indebted to you, but I won't be a charity case." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Stubborn, aren't you? My husband used to say I had a mule beat for stubbornness." The mention of James sent a pang through her heart, but it was duller now, the sharp grief mellowing into a softer ache. "Very well," Everett conceded. "Martha could use help with the house and cooking, and come spring, we'll need to expand the garden if we're feeding more mouths." He closed the ledger. "But you'll tell me if it becomes too much. The twins need their mother healthy." "I will," Violet promised, relieved to have a purpose beyond nursing and rocking her babies. Martha was delighted with the arrangement, happy to share her duties and teach Violet the rhythms of ranch life. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Violet would rise early to help with breakfast, tending the twins between tasks. After the men ate and headed out for the day's work, she would clean, mend, and help prepare the midday and evening meals. In the afternoons, when the twins napped, she often sat on the porch with her mending, enjoying the fresh air and the distant sight of Everett working with the cattle or horses. She learned more about him through Martha, who had known him since he was a boy. His mother died when he was 12, Martha told her one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough. Consumption took her. His father raised him alone. After that, taught him everything about ranching. Good man, old Mr. Chase, but hard. Expected a lot from his son. "Everett never married?" Violet asked, trying to sound merely curious. Martha's knowing smile suggested she saw right through the question. "Came close once, about 7 years back. Pretty girl named Annabelle, daughter of the banker in Virginia City. But she couldn't stomach ranch life, wanted him to sell up and move to the city." Martha shook her head. "Everett Chase without his land would be like a fish without water. He let her go rather than give up Silverbrook." As autumn progressed, bringing cooler weather and golden aspen leaves, Violet found herself watching Everett more often. He was a quiet man, but not unfriendly. With Timothy, he was patient and instructive. With Fletcher, respectful and often deferential on matters of horses. With Martha, warm and appreciative. And with Violet, increasingly attentive. She noticed how he would watch her with the twins, a curious expression on his face as if trying to understand the bond between mother and children. He began bringing small gifts, wildflowers that still bloomed in sheltered spots, a carved wooden rattle for the babies, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Never presented with fanfare, always with that same casual manner, as if it were perfectly natural for a rancher to think of such things. One evening in late October, Violet sat on the porch after dinner, the twins asleep in a basket beside her. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the surrounding hills. Everett emerged from the barn and, spotting her, crossed the yard to join her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair. "Of course." Violet smiled, setting aside her mending. "It's your porch." "Reckon it's as much yours as mine these days," he replied, settling into the chair with a tired sigh. "You've made this place more of a home in 2 months than I managed in 5 years." The compliment warmed her, and she was glad the fading light hid her blush. "I've always believed a house needs a woman's touch to become a home. My mother used to say the same." He gazed out at the darkening landscape. "She would have liked you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the deepening twilight. Samuel stirred in his sleep, making tiny mewling sounds, and Everett leaned over to look at him. "He has your eyes," he observed softly. "Both of them do." But Sarah has her father's smile, Violet replied. Sometimes when she grins, I see James so clearly it takes my breath away. Everett nodded, understanding in his expression. Do you want to tell me about him? Your husband? No one had asked Violet about James since his death. The question unleashed a flood of memories and emotions she'd kept carefully contained while focusing on survival. He was a dreamer, she began, her voice thick with unshed tears. Always chasing the next big strike. We came west from Missouri after we married. I was 18. He was 23. James was convinced he would strike it rich in the mines, and we would build a grand house and raise a dozen children. She smiled sadly at the memory. He worked so hard, always believing the next dig would be the one. When the twins were on the way, he borrowed money for equipment, certain he would hit a rich vein before they were born. She looked down at her sleeping babies. He never got to meet them. The fever took him 3 weeks before they arrived. I'm sorry, Everett said simply, and she knew he meant it. It's a hard country for dreamers. Yes, she agreed. But dreams are what brought us all west, aren't they? Even you must have had dreams when you took over this ranch. He considered this, running a hand through his dark hair. Not dreams so much as duty at first. My father built this place, I couldn't let it fall to ruin. But now. He looked around at the ranch, his expression softening. Now I dream of what it could become. And what's that? Violet asked. A legacy worth passing on. Land that provides not just for me, but for generations to come. His gaze drifted to the twins. Land that sees families grow and thrive. Something in his tone made Violet's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, Sarah began to cry in earnest, followed quickly by Samuel. Hungry again, Violet sighed, gathering them up. They're growing so fast. Everett stood to help her. Let me carry the basket. It's getting chilly out here anyway. As they walked to the door together, their hands brushed accidentally. Violet felt a jolt of awareness shoot through her, and from Everett's sudden intake of breath, she suspected he felt it too. He held the door open for her, and as she passed him, their eyes met briefly in the lamplight. That night, lying in bed with her babies sleeping beside her, Violet acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. She was starting to have feelings for Everett Chase, feelings that went beyond gratitude for her rescue or appreciation for his kindness. And that realization terrified her almost as much as it excited her. Winter came early to the Comstock that year, with the first heavy snow falling before Thanksgiving. The ranch settled into its cold weather rhythms. The cattle brought closer to the barn, the days shorter and focused on indoor tasks and maintenance. Everett and Timothy spent long hours repairing equipment in the barn, while Fletcher kept the stables warm and the horses exercised. Inside the house, Violet and Martha prepared for the holidays. The twins were nearly 5 months old now, growing plump and healthy, beginning to smile and coo responsively. They were a delight to everyone on the ranch, even Fletcher, who had initially seemed wary of babies but now spent time each evening making funny faces at them while they lay on a blanket before the fire. One December afternoon, Violet was in the kitchen teaching Timothy how to make gingerbread when Everett burst through the door, snow dusting his coat and hat. "Storm's coming in faster than expected," he announced, stamping his boots on the mat. "Martha, you'd better head back to town now if you want to beat it. Tim and I just got the last of the cattle into the north pasture shelter." Martha looked worried as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Will you manage all right?" "I might not be able to get back for several days if it's as bad as they're saying." "We'll manage," Everett assured her. "Violet's cooking has improved enough that we won't starve." He winked at Violet, who rolled her eyes good-naturedly. After helping Martha pack her things and seeing her safely on her way in the ranch's sleigh, with Timothy driving to ensure she reached town before the worst of the storm hit. Everett returned to find Violet in the parlor, nursing the twins by the fire. He hesitated in the doorway, still uncomfortable interrupting these intimate moments. "You can come in," Violet said without turning around. "They're almost finished, and I'm decent enough." Everett entered, removing his coat and hanging it by the fire to dry. He sank into the armchair opposite her, his face ruddy from the cold, his hair damp with melted snow. "Timothy will stay in town tonight," he explained. "Fletcher's secured in his quarters by the stable. Looks like it's just us and the little ones tonight." Violet nodded, adjusting Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her breast. "I made stew earlier. It should be ready by now." "I can serve it if you're busy with them," Everett offered, rising to his feet again. "Thank you." Violet smiled gratefully. "There's fresh bread, too, wrapped in the cloth by the stove." Everett returned shortly with 2 bowls of steaming stew and thick slices of bread. He set Violet's portion on the small table beside her chair, careful not to disturb the nursing twins. "This is the first real winter they've experienced," Violet commented, looking down at her babies. "I hope they'll be warm enough tonight. The nursery gets chilly." "Why don't you bring them into your room?" Everett suggested, blowing on a spoonful of stew. "It's the warmest bedroom in the house." Violet nodded. "I might do that. They're usually good sleepers, but the wind might frighten them." As if on cue, a powerful gust rattled the windows and the fire flickered in the hearth. Outside, the snow was falling in thick, swirling sheets, already accumulating on the windowsills. "Going to be a rough night," Everett observed, moving to add another log to the fire. "But we're well stocked with firewood and provisions. No need to worry." They ate in companionable silence, listening to the storm gathering force outside. After dinner, Everett insisted on cleaning up while Violet settled the twins for the night. When she returned downstairs, she found him in the parlor with a book open on his lap, though he didn't appear to be reading it. "They're asleep?" he asked, looking up as she entered. "For now." Violet sat across from him, picking up her mending basket. "Though Samuel will likely wake around midnight for another feeding." Everett watched her sort through the basket, selecting a pair of his socks that needed darning. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "You should rest while they sleep." Violet shook her head. "I like keeping busy. Besides, these won't darn themselves." She held up one sock with a sizable hole in the heel. "Do you walk on rocks, Mr. Chase?" he chuckled. "Feels that way sometimes after a long day in the saddle." The wind howled outside and the house creaked and groaned against its force. Violet shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "Would you like some coffee?" Everett asked, noticing her discomfort. "Or perhaps something stronger to ward off the chill." "Coffee would be nice," she replied. "Though I wouldn't say no to a splash of whiskey in it on a night like this." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Didn't take you for a whiskey drinker." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," she said with a small smile. Everett returned with 2 steaming mugs, each with a modest amount of amber liquid added. "My father's good Kentucky bourbon," he explained, handing her a cup. "Saved for special occasions." "And is this a special occasion?" Violet asked, taking a sip and feeling the pleasant burn as it went down. "First blizzard of the season with a pretty woman for company. I'd say that qualifies." The compliment slipped out easily, but Everett immediately looked as if he regretted his forwardness. Violet felt her cheeks flush, and not just from the bourbon. "I'm hardly at my best these days," she demurred, gesturing to her simple dress and hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Motherhood doesn't leave much time for vanity." "Motherhood suits you," Everett said quietly. "I've never seen anything more beautiful than watching you with your children." The sincerity in his voice caught Violet off guard. She'd noticed his glances, appreciated his kindness, but this was the first time he'd spoken so directly of his admiration. "Everett," she began, uncertain how to respond. He held up a hand. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable." "That wasn't my intention." "You haven't," she assured him quickly. It's been a long time since anyone has seen me as more than a mother or a widow or a debtor." "I've seen you as Violet from the first day," he said simply. "Everything else is just circumstance." The storm raged on outside, but inside the parlor, a different kind of tension was building, warmer and more promising than the cold fury of winter. Violet set aside her mending, and Everett closed his book. They talked late into the night, sharing stories from their childhoods, dreams for the future, and the small, everyday observations that slowly reveal one person to another. When the clock struck midnight, Violet reluctantly rose to check on the twins. "I should get some sleep before Samuel wakes for his feeding." Everett stood as well, suddenly looking uncertain. "Violet, I want you to know something." She paused at the foot of the stairs, her heart racing. "Your contract I burned it the day after we arrived home." He met her gaze steadily. "You're not indebted to me. You're free to leave whenever you wish, to go wherever you want." Violet stared at him, processing his words. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "At first, I thought you'd leave as soon as you were strong enough," he admitted. "Then, as time passed, it seemed less important. You were making a place for yourself here, and He hesitated. "I was selfish enough to hope you might stay. And now," she whispered, "now I need you to know that whatever happens between us, if anything happens, it's your choice. Not obligation or gratitude or necessity." He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "Good night, Violet." "Good night, Everett," she replied, her mind whirling with this new knowledge as she climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children. The blizzard lasted 3 days, during which Everett and Violet were largely confined to the house, except for necessary trips to the barn and stables to care for the animals. Timothy returned on the 4th day, making his way from town on horseback once the main road was passable, bringing news and mail and Martha's concerned instructions for caring for the house in her absence. Something had shifted between Violet and Everett during those storm-bound days. There was an awareness, a careful dance of glances and small touches, handing off a child, passing a dish at mealtime, standing close by the fire. Nothing had been declared, but possibilities hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolation of the ranch. Violet decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, while Everett and Timothy cut a small tree from the wooded area behind the property. Fletcher carved simple wooden ornaments, and Martha, once the roads cleared enough for her return, baked an abundance of holiday treats. On Christmas Eve, after a special dinner and the exchange of modest gifts, the household gathered in the parlor. Fletcher played carols on his harmonica, while Timothy sang in a surprisingly sweet tenor. The twins, now almost 6 months old, were propped on a blanket, wide-eyed at the music and candlelight. When the evening wound down, Fletcher and Timothy headed to their quarters, and Martha to the guest room she used when staying overnight. Violet lingered in the parlor with Everett, reluctant for the evening to end. "I have something else for you," Everett said, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." He handed her a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Curious, Violet unwrapped it to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It was my mother's," Everett explained. "Inside is room for 2 small portraits. I thought perhaps of the twins when they're a bit older." Violet's fingers trembled as she opened the locket to reveal its empty interior, waiting to be filled with the faces of her children. "Everett, I can't accept this. It's too valuable. too personal. "Please," he said softly. She would have wanted it to go to someone who understands what it means to be a mother. With tears in her eyes, Violet turned and lifted her hair. "Will you help me put it on?" Everett's fingers were surprisingly gentle for a rancher as he fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck. His hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, and when Violet turned to face him, she found him much closer than expected. "Thank you," she whispered, the locket cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through her chest. Everett's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Violet," a cry from upstairs interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Sarah was awake and fussing. "I should go," Violet said reluctantly. Everett nodded, stepping back to give her space. "Of course. Good night, Violet. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Everett," she replied, touching the locket at her throat before hurrying upstairs to tend to her daughter. January brought more snow and bitter cold. The ranch operated at a slower pace, with most work focused on maintaining rather than expanding. Everett spent more evenings at home, often reading to the twins while Violet worked on household tasks. They had developed a comfortable rhythm together, almost like a family, though neither had spoken of the moment that nearly happened on Christmas Eve. One evening in late January, Violet was preparing dinner when Fletcher came to the kitchen door, his expression grave. "Miss Violet, there's a man at the main house asking for you," he said. "Says he's a lawyer from Gold Hill." Violet's hand stilled on the dough she was kneading. "Did he say what he wants?" Fletcher shook his head. "Just that it's important business concerning you and the little ones." With a sense of foreboding, Violet wiped her hands and went to the parlor where Everett was already speaking with the visitor, a thin man in a city suit who looked uncomfortable and cold despite the roaring fire. "Ah, Mrs. Jameson," the man said, rising as she entered. "I'm Harold Winters, attorney at law. I represent the estate of your late husband's uncle, Mr. Tobias Jameson." "Uncle Tobias," Violet repeated in confusion. James mentioned him once or twice, but they weren't close. He lived back east somewhere. "Boston," Mr. Winters confirmed. "And he passed away last month. In his will, he left a substantial inheritance to his nephew James or, in the event of James's death, to James's legitimate heirs." Violet sank into a chair, stunned. "An inheritance?" "Yes, madam. A sum of $5,000 to be precise." The lawyer adjusted his spectacles. "I've been tracking you down for some weeks now, ever since the Boston firm contacted our office in Gold Hill." $5,000, Violet echoed faintly. It was an enormous sum, enough to buy a small house and live comfortably for years. "The money has been deposited in the First Bank of Virginia City, awaiting your signature on several documents." Mr. Winters reached into his briefcase and extracted a sheaf of papers. "I can explain the terms if you wish." Violet looked at Everett, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Would you excuse us for a moment, Mr. Winters?" Violet asked. "Everett, may I speak with you privately?" In the kitchen, Violet closed the door and turned to Everett, her mind racing. "I don't know what to say." "It's your money, Violet," Everett said quietly. "Yours and the twins. You don't need my permission or opinion." "But I want it," she insisted. "This changes everything. I could leave, establish my own household, provide for my children without depending on anyone's charity." Everett's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think this has been? Charity?" "No," Violet said quickly. "That's not what I meant, but this money means independence. It means choices." "Including the choice to leave Silverbrook," Everett said, his voice strained. "To leave us." "Us?" Violet challenged gently. "What exactly are we, Everett? You've never said." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I thought I hoped you knew how I felt." How much you and the twins have come to mean to me. Then say it, Violet pressed, her heart pounding. Tell me what you want. Everett looked at her then, his blue eyes intense with emotion. I want you to stay, not as an employee or a guest or whatever arrangement we've been pretending this is. I want you to stay as my wife. I want to raise Sarah and Samuel as my own. I want us to be a family. Violet's breath caught in her throat. You want to marry me? I've wanted to marry you since about 2 weeks after you arrived, he admitted with a rueful smile. But I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated. I wanted you to choose me because you wanted to, not because you needed me. Violet moved closer to him, reaching up to touch his face. And now I have the means to leave, but you're asking me to stay. Yes, he caught her hand in his. Stay because you want to, not because you have to. Stay because, he took a deep breath. Stay because I love you, Violet. I love you and those babies more than I ever thought possible. Tears welled in Violet's eyes. When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I never imagined that the man who bought my contract would end up offering me his heart instead. Is that a yes? Everett asked, hope lighting his features. It's a yes, Violet whispered, rising on her tiptoes to press her lips to his. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but filled with promise. Everett's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. Months of unspoken longing finally finding expression. When they broke apart, both breathless, Violet laughed softly. We should return to Mr. Winters before he freezes in our parlor. Let him wait a minute more, Everett murmured, capturing her lips again in a kiss that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. Eventually, they did return to the parlor, where Mr. Winters was anxiously checking his pocket watch. I apologize for the delay, Violet said, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. I'll sign your papers, Mr. Winters, but I have a few conditions of my own to add. The lawyer blinked in surprise. Conditions, Mrs. Jameson? Yes, I'd like part of the funds to be set aside in trust for my children until they come of age. She glanced at Everett, who nodded encouragingly. And I'd like to invest the remainder in Silverbrook Ranch. Invest. Mr. Winters repeated, confused. Violet smiled, reaching for Everett's hand. My fiancé and I have plans for expanding the ranch. The money will help us build our future together. Everett's hand tightened around hers, as Mr. Winters offered stammering congratulations and began revising the paperwork according to Violet's wishes. News of Violet's inheritance and engagement to Everett spread quickly through the neighboring ranches and into Gold Hill and Virginia City. Some gossiped that she had schemed to catch one of the territory's most eligible bachelors, while others whispered that Everett had married her for her money. But those who knew them, Martha, Fletcher, Timothy, and the handful of other ranch hands and neighbors who had watched their relationship develop, understood the truth. That what had begun as an act of compassion had grown into a love strong enough to weather any storm the Nevada wilderness could muster. They were married in April, when the worst of winter had passed, and the first wildflowers dotted the meadows around Silverbrook. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the ranch's front yard beneath an arbor Everett and the men had constructed. Sarah and Samuel, now 10 months old and beginning to pull themselves up to stand, watched from Martha's lap as their mother, radiant in a simple white dress with Everett's mother's locket at her throat, pledged her life to the man who had saved them all. I never thought I could love again after James, Violet confessed to Everett that night as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom. I thought that part of my life was over. And I never thought I'd find someone who could love this land as much as I do, Everett replied, stroking her hair. Someone who would see Silverbrook as a home worth building, not a burden to escape. It's more than the land, Violet said softly. It's you. Your kindness, your patience, your strength. You gave me back my dignity that day at the auction block, but you gave me so much more in the months that followed. You gave me hope. Everett pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You gave me a family, Violet. Something I'd stopped believing I would ever have. Spring turned to summer, and under their combined efforts, Silverbrook Ranch flourished. Violet's inheritance allowed them to purchase additional cattle and hire more hands. They expanded the garden, added rooms to the house, and built a proper nursery for the twins. Everett legally adopted Sarah and Samuel, who called him Papa as soon as they could form the words. By the twins' first birthday in July, Violet had news of her own to share. One evening, after the children were asleep, she found Everett on the porch, enjoying the cool evening air after a hot summer day. "Room for one more?" she asked, settling beside him on the swing he'd built that spring. "Always room for you," he replied, draping an arm around her shoulders. Violet leaned into his embrace, gathering her courage. "Everett, do you remember when we were trapped here during the blizzard last winter?" he chuckled. "Hard to forget. 3 days with just us and the twins while the wind tried to tear the roof off." "Well," Violet said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "it seems we created more than just memories during that storm." Everett stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "You're with child," Violet nodded, her eyes shining. "Due in January, according to Dr. Miller." "Another winter baby." Everett whooped with joy, lifting her from the swing and spinning her around on the porch. "A baby, our baby." "SHH," Violet laughed, glancing toward the upstairs windows. "You'll wake the twins." He set her down gently, cradling her face in his hands. "I love you, Violet Chase. More every day." "And I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My cowboy who bought a family at auction and got more than he bargained for." "Best purchase I ever made," Everett said with a grin, before kissing her beneath the star-filled Nevada sky. Winter returned to the Comstock, bringing with it memories of the previous year when Violet had been newly arrived at Silverbrook, uncertain of her future and still grieving her past. Now, heavy with child and watching her twins, sturdy toddlers of 18 months, playing by the fire under Everett's watchful eye, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. The inheritance had allowed them to improve the ranch significantly. The house boasted a new wing with additional bedrooms and a proper indoor bathroom, a luxury few ranches in the territory could claim. The barn had been expanded, the herd doubled in size, and Everett had hired 3 more hands to help manage the growing operation. But more meaningful than the material improvements were the intangible changes. Silverbrook was truly a home now, filled with laughter and love. Martha had moved in permanently, claiming she was too old to make the journey from town several times a week, especially with another baby on the way. Fletcher had taken Timothy under his wing, teaching the boy everything he knew about horses, preparing him to eventually take over as Silverbrook's head wrangler. And Everett, her stoic, steadfast Everett, had blossomed into a doting father and an affectionate husband. The man who had once seemed so reserved now sang silly songs to make the twins giggle and spent hours crafting wooden toys in his workshop. He spoke openly of his feelings, sharing his hopes and dreams with Violet in the quiet moments before sleep claimed them each night. On a snowy January morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the bedroom curtains, Violet woke to a familiar sensation. The baby was coming. She touched Everett's shoulder gently. "Everett," she whispered, "it's time." He was instantly alert, sitting up and reaching for his clothes. "Are you certain? It's 2 weeks early." "Babies come when they're ready, not according to our schedules," Violet said with a smile, wincing as another contraction began. "This one seems eager to meet us." Everett helped her dress in a warm nightgown, then hurried to wake Martha and send one of the hands for the midwife in town. Unlike with the twins, when Violet had labored alone in a cold room above the general store, this birth would be attended by people who cared for her, in the comfort of her own home. The labor progressed quickly. By mid-morning, with snow falling steadily outside, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Everett, who had paced anxiously outside the door throughout, was called in to meet his son. "He's perfect," Everett whispered, cradling the newborn with tears in his eyes. "Absolutely perfect." "What shall we name him?" Violet asked, exhausted but radiant. Everett studied the baby's face. "What about Thomas, after my father, Thomas Chase?" Violet said, trying out the name. "I like it." "Thomas James, perhaps? To honor both grandfathers." Everett nodded, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, holding their son while Violet rested her head against his arm, both marveling at the new life they had created. Martha brought Sarah and Samuel in to meet their baby brother later that day. The twins approached the bed cautiously, curious about the small bundle in their mother's arms. "Baby?" Samuel asked, pointing. "Yes, sweetheart," Violet confirmed. "This is your brother Thomas." Sarah, always the bolder of the two, reached out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. "Our baby," she declared confidently. "That's right," Everett said, lifting Samuel onto his lap so he could see better. "He's part of our family now, just like all of us." As she watched her husband and children together, Violet thought back to that terrible day on the auction block, when she had felt utterly alone and without hope. Never could she have imagined that the tall stranger in the dusty coat would become the center of her world, or that the act of purchasing her contract would lead to such profound happiness. Life at Silverbrook continued to flourish with the addition of Thomas. By his first birthday, the ranch had gained a reputation as one of the most prosperous in the territory. Everett's innovative breeding programs improved their cattle stock, while Violet's careful management of the household and gardens ensured they wanted for nothing. The twins grew into sturdy 3-year-olds with their mother's green eyes and curious minds. Samuel showed an early interest in horses, following Fletcher around the stables whenever permitted, while Sarah became Martha's shadow in the kitchen, standing on a stool to help with baking. In the spring of 1879, as Violet planted her garden with Thomas toddling nearby and the twins helping in their haphazard way, a wagon appeared on the road leading to the ranch house. Shading her eyes against the sun, Violet recognized the banker from Virginia City, Mr. Harding, along with another man she didn't know. Everett emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled into the yard, wiping his hands on a rag and nodding a greeting to the visitors. "Mr. Chase," the banker called, climbing down stiffly. "Mrs. Chase, hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Everett replied, though Violet could tell from his expression that he was wary of an unexpected visit from the banker. "What brings you out to Silverbrook?" Mr. Harding gestured to his companion, a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit. "This is Mr. Carlton from San Francisco. He has a proposition that might interest you." Over coffee in the parlor, the children having been taken to the kitchen by Martha for cookies and milk, Mr. Carlton explained his purpose. He represented a group of investors interested in establishing a premium beef supply line from Nevada to California's growing cities. "We've heard excellent things about your breeding program, Mr. Chase," Carlton said. "Particularly your success with crossing Herefords with the local stock for better cold weather hardiness. We'd like to contract with Silverbrook as one of our primary suppliers." Everett leaned forward, interested but cautious. "What exactly would that entail?" A guaranteed purchase of 50 head per season at premium prices, Carlton explained, with potential for expansion if the quality remains consistent. We'd also be interested in your expertise as a consultant for other ranches in our network. It was a substantial opportunity, one that would secure Silverbrook's prosperity for years to come. Everett glanced at Violet, who gave him an encouraging nod. "We'd need to review the terms carefully," Everett said, "but I'm certainly interested in discussing this further." After the men departed, promising to send formal contracts for review, Violet found Everett in his study, staring thoughtfully out the window. "This could change everything," he said as she entered. "Expand the operation, maybe buy that adjacent property the Wilsons have been looking to sell." "You've worked hard for this," Violet said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "You deserve the recognition." Everett turned in her embrace. "We worked for this. Everything Silverbrook has become, we built together." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to town that day, if I hadn't seen you standing there with the twins." "I've wondered that too," Violet admitted. "But I prefer to think it was meant to be, that no matter what paths we took, we would have found each other eventually." "A romantic notion," Everett teased gently. "Perhaps," Violet smiled. "But I believe some souls are destined to meet, no matter the circumstances." That evening, after the children were asleep, Everett and Violet sat on their porch swing as had become their custom. The spring air was cool but not uncomfortable, fragrant with blooming wildflowers and the earthy scent of the recently plowed fields. "I received a letter from Rebecca today," Violet mentioned, referring to the friend she had made in Virginia City, the wife of a local merchant. "She wrote about a family that arrived last week, a young widow with 3 small children, all of them half-starved and desperate." Everett nodded, understanding immediately where her thoughts were leading. "You want to help them?" "I was thinking," Violet said carefully, "with the new contract and expansion, we'll need more help around the house. Martha isn't getting any younger, and with the children growing so active. You want to offer her a position here," Everett concluded. "If you don't mind," Violet said. "I can't help remembering how it felt having nowhere to turn, no one to depend on." Everett squeezed her hand. "We have plenty of room, especially once the new addition is complete. Write to Rebecca tomorrow and extend the invitation." Violet leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "Thank you for understanding." "Understanding is the least of what I owe you," Everett said softly. "You taught me what it means to truly build something worthwhile, not just a successful ranch, but a home where people are valued for who they are, not what they can produce." "We've built it together," Violet reminded him, echoing his earlier words. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, planning their future. The contract with Carlton's investors would allow them to expand Silverbrook in ways they had only dreamed of before. The adjacent Wilson property would provide additional grazing land and access to another water source. There was talk of the railroad extending a spur line closer to their region, which would make transportation of cattle to market much easier. But more important than these business considerations were their plans for their growing family. The new wing of the house would include a schoolroom, as the twins would be ready for formal education soon. They discussed the possibility of hiring a teacher to instruct not only their children but those of their workers and neighbors as well. "A proper school at Silverbrook," Everett mused. "My father would never have imagined such a thing." "Times change," Violet said. "The West is changing too. It's not just a place for lone men seeking fortunes anymore. It's becoming a place where families can thrive." As the stars emerged in the clear Nevada sky, Violet thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The heartbreak of losing James, the terror of standing on the auction block with her babies at her breast, the uncertainty of following a stranger to his ranch, all of it had led here. To this porch, this man, this life filled with purpose and love. The widow from Virginia City, Amanda Miller, arrived at Silverbrook the following week with her children, 2 boys aged 7 and 5, and a girl of 3. They were indeed thin and weary-eyed, their few possessions packed in a single trunk. Violet greeted them warmly, remembering all too well how it felt to arrive at an unfamiliar place with nothing but hope and desperation. Amanda proved to be a capable assistant to Martha in the kitchen and a diligent housekeeper. Her children, initially shy and withdrawn, soon blossomed in the nurturing environment of the ranch. The boys followed Timothy around like eager puppies, while little Emma became fast friends with Sarah, the 2 girls chattering endlessly as they played with their dolls. Thomas, now an active toddler of nearly 18 months, toddled after all of them, determined to keep up with the bigger children. His dark hair and blue eyes marked him unmistakably as Everett's son, though his stubborn determination was pure violet. Summer passed in a blur of activity as the ranch implemented the changes necessary for their new contract. Additional hands were hired, new pastures fenced, and the foundation laid for an expanded barn. Everett traveled to San Francisco once to meet with Carlton and the other investors, returning with renewed enthusiasm for their partnership. "They're talking about establishing a breeding center here in the territory," he told Violet upon his return. "Using our methods as a model for improving stock throughout the region. They could hardly find a better example," Violet said proudly. "You've transformed Silverbrook's herd into the finest in Nevada." Autumn brought the first shipment under the new contract, 50 prime cattle sent by rail to San Francisco, fetching a price that exceeded even Carlton's initial offer. The success cemented Silverbrook's reputation and brought inquiries from other ranchers interested in purchasing breeding stock. As winter approached again, the expanded house stood complete, with comfortable quarters for Amanda and her children in the new wing, a spacious schoolroom with large windows, and additional bedrooms for their growing extended family. Martha had officially retired from daily cooking duties, though she still supervised the kitchen and spoiled the children with special treats. On Christmas Eve, 4 years to the day since Everett had given Violet his mother's locket, the family gathered in the parlor of their home. The room was warm and festive, decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. A large tree stood in the corner, adorned with Fletcher's carved ornaments and strings of dried berries the children had made under Martha's direction. After the younger children were tucked into bed, dreaming of the presents that would appear by morning, Everett asked Violet to join him for a walk. Despite the cold, she agreed, curious about his unusual request. They bundled up against the winter chill and stepped outside. The night was clear and still, the stars brilliant in the black sky above. Everett led her to the barn, which was warm and fragrant with the scent of hay and horses. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to a stall at the far end. Inside was a beautiful bay mare, clearly of fine breeding, with a white star on her forehead. The horse nickered softly as they approached. "This is Liberty," Everett said. "She's yours," Violet gasped, reaching out to stroke the mare's velvety nose. "Mine, but Everett, I hardly know how to ride." "Which is why she's perfect for you, gentle, patient, but spirited when needed." He smiled at the obvious parallel. "I thought it was time you had a horse of your own, now that Thomas is old enough for you to have a few hours to yourself occasionally." Violet was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Learning to ride properly had been a desire of hers since coming to Silverbrook, but between the demands of motherhood and running the household, she had never found the time. "She's beautiful," Violet said, admiring the mare's glossy coat. "Thank you." "There's more," Everett said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small box wrapped in silver paper. "This is the real reason I brought you out here. I wanted a moment alone with you." Curious, Violet unwrapped the package to find a velvet jeweler's box. Inside was a gold ring set with a circle of small diamonds surrounding a larger center stone that caught the lamplight and scattered it in rainbow prisms. "Everett," she breathed, stunned by the extravagance of the gift. "When we married, I could only afford a simple band," he said, taking the ring from the box. "You never complained, never asked for more, but I promised myself that when Silverbrook prospered, I would give you a ring worthy of the woman who helped make it all possible." He slid the ring onto her finger where it nestled perfectly against her wedding band. "You didn't just save this ranch, Violet. You saved me, from loneliness, from a life half-lived." Tears filled Violet's eyes as she admired the sparkling ring. "I've never needed fancy jewels to know how much you love me, but it's beautiful, and I'll treasure it always." She rose on tiptoes to kiss him, her arms winding around his neck. "Just as I treasure you, Everett Chase, my unlikely hero." As they walked back to the house, arms around each other against the cold, Violet marveled again at the twists of fate that had brought her to this place, this life, this love. From the depths of despair on that auction block in Gold Hill, she had found happiness she could never have imagined. The new year of 1880 dawned bright with promise. The West was changing, growing, becoming more civilized, but the spirit that had drawn pioneers across the continent remained the belief in building something meaningful, in creating a legacy that would outlast a single lifetime. At Silverbrook Ranch, that legacy took many forms: the thriving cattle operation that set standards for the territory, the small school that now served a dozen children from the ranch and neighboring properties, the gardens that produced abundance each summer, and most importantly, the family that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. On a warm spring afternoon, as Violet sat on her favorite bench in the garden, watching Thomas chase butterflies while Sarah and Samuel helped Amanda plant seedlings, she felt a profound sense of contentment. The shadow of her past the auction block, the fear, the uncertainty had faded, replaced by the bright reality of the present and the promise of the future. Everett found her there, sitting beside her with a contented sigh. "Carlton sent word that they want to increase our contract to 75 head per season," he said, taking her hand. "And they're recommending Silverbrook to some associates in Colorado who want to improve their stock." "That's wonderful news," Violet replied, leaning against his shoulder. "You've worked so hard for this recognition." "We've worked for it," he corrected, as he always did. "Everything good in my life has come since that day I saw you in Gold Hill." Violet smiled, thinking of all they had built together in the 5 years since that desperate day. "Who would have thought that the lowest moment of my life would lead me to my greatest happiness?" Everett squeezed her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I knew the moment I saw you holding those babies that you were something special, someone worth fighting for." "You didn't just fight for me," Violet said softly. "You gave me back my dignity, my hope. You showed me that even in the darkest times, goodness can find us." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they watched their children playing in the golden light, Sarah with her mother's green eyes and determined spirit, Samuel with his quiet thoughtfulness and gentle heart, Thomas with his father's features and boundless energy. They were the living embodiment of the love that had grown between a desperate young mother and the cowboy, who had saved her from the auction block. A love that had transformed not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. In the distance, the cattle grazed peacefully in lush pastures, the lifeblood of Silverbrook Ranch. The expanded house stood solid and welcoming, lights beginning to glow in the windows as evening approached. And all around them, the land stretched away toward the horizon, their land, their home, their legacy. "We should go in," Everett said eventually as the air grew cooler. "Martha's making a special dinner to celebrate the contract news." Violet nodded, rising from the bench. But before they called the children, she turned to her husband, framing his face with her hands. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, his blue eyes soft with love. "For seeing value in me when no one else did. For buying all three of us that day." Everett smiled, drawing her close. "Best purchase I ever made," he murmured against her lips before kissing her tenderly. As twilight settled over Silverbrook Ranch, they walked hand in hand toward the house, their children running ahead, their future stretching before them as wide and promising as the Nevada sky above a future built on an unlikely beginning, nurtured by unwavering love, and destined to flourish for generations to come.